What if the creatures you thought were metaphors were memories? What if the beings Scripture describes with trembling detail, scales like shields, breath like furnace fire, wings that sound like rushing waters? What if they were not poetry but testimony? The ancient world did not divide reality into natural and supernatural the way we do. They lived in a cosmos where the veil was thin, where the spiritual realm pressed close enough to touch, close enough to terrify. And when the prophets wrote of creatures that defied understanding, they did not write allegory. They wrote witness accounts. We have learned to read these passages as symbols, safe behind our assumption that nothing so strange could be real. But what if that assumption is the real blindness? What if the creatures of Scripture, the beasts, the cherubim, the things that rise from sea and abyss, were placed in the text not to decorate it, but to warn it, to mark the boundaries of a reality far larger and far more dangerous than the one we've constructed in our minds? In this exploration, you will encounter 10 beings that Scripture describes with precision and dread. Not myths borrowed from neighboring cultures, not editorial embellishments added by later scribes, but creatures that appear in the text as signs, signs of magnitude, signs of proximity, signs that the God who spoke galaxies into being also shaped forms that should not exist, forms that exist to reveal something we were never meant to forget. Prepare yourself to see what the surface reading never explains. Prepare to ask why these beings were shown, why they were described, and what they still reveal about the world you think you know. The ancient Near East was a world of stone and shadow, of cities built low against the earth and skies that felt too close. Empires rose along river valleys, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Canaan, and every throne claimed divine sanction. Every temple promised control over forces that moved unseen. But beneath the architecture of power, beneath the rituals and the royal decrees, there was an older knowledge. The people who walked those streets, who labored in those fields, who trembled before those altars, they knew something modernity has forgotten. They knew that creation was not fully tamed, that the world held seams where something else could break through. Scripture does not merely mention these creatures in passing, it lingers on them. It describes them with a specificity that suggests the writers were looking at something, either with physical eyes or through vision so vivid it left details seared into memory. When the book of Job speaks of Behemoth, it does not offer a quick reference. It builds a portrait. Look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. The creature is introduced as a work of divine craftsmanship, placed alongside humanity as evidence of the same Creator's hand. But the comparison stops there. Behemoth is not mankind's peer. Its strength is concentrated in its loins, its power coiled in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar, not a branch, but a tree. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like bars of iron. This is not a domesticated animal. This is not something that fits into human categories of control. The passage does not tell us to fear Behemoth. It tells us to observe it, to let its sheer physical presence recalibrate our sense of scale. If such a creature exists, if God shaped something that massive, that untamable, then what does that say about the God who shaped it? Behemoth becomes a living argument, a creature so overwhelming that its existence alone is proof of a power infinitely greater. But majesty is not the only language Scripture uses when it speaks of these beings. There are creatures in the text that do not inspire awe so much as horror, and that horror is deliberate. The vision given to the Apostle John on the island of Patmos does not open gently. The sea churns, and from it rises a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Crowns rest on its horns. Names of blasphemy are written across its heads. Its body is a fusion, leopard, bear, lion, forms that should never merge, predators stitched together into a single entity. The beast is not random. It is composite, designed, symbolic. Each element speaks to kingdoms, to powers, to the consolidation of earthly dominion under a single will that mocks heaven. This is not a creature that hides. It rises in full view, crowned and blasphemous, because it represents a moment when evil stops pretending. And then, from the earth itself, another beast emerges. This one wears a different mask. It has the appearance of a lamb, gentle, sacrificial, trustworthy. But when it speaks, the voice is not a lamb's. It is the voice of the dragon, deception incarnate. This second beast does not conquer through violence, but through imitation. It mimics the sacred. It performs signs that convince the masses. It builds an image and demands worship, and those who refuse are marked for exclusion, for death. The subtlety here is chilling. The first beast declares itself. The second beast disguises itself. One rules through terror, the other through seduction. Together, they represent the full spectrum of corrupted power, both the overt and the covert, both the throne and the altar. The sea, in Hebrew thought, was not merely water, it was chaos. It was the unformed deep that existed before creation, the place from which God separated order. To say a beast rises from the sea is to say it comes from chaos itself, from the part of reality that resists divine structure. And if the sea is chaos, what is the abyss? Leviathan is not just another creature, it is the creature, the king over all that dwell in the sea. Job 41 spends verse after verse on its description, as though the text itself is struggling to contain the image. Its scales are impenetrable, fitted so tightly together that no air can pass between them. Its eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. From its mouth come burning torches, sparks of fire leap out. Smoke pours from its nostrils like a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath kindles coals, and flames dart from its mouth. When it rises, the mighty are terrified. Weapons do not pierce it. Iron is like straw to it. Arrows cannot make it flee. Clubs are counted as stubble. It laughs at the rattling of the javelin. This is not a metaphor for something else. This is a description of something Scripture insists exists. Something God made and God alone can master. Leviathan is chaos given form, the serpentine embodiment of forces that no human power can subdue. And yet, Scripture frames it not as a threat to God, but as a demonstration of God's supremacy. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? The question is rhetorical and devastating. You cannot, but God can. The creature that represents everything untamable in creation is, in the end, tamed, not destroyed, tamed, contained, allowed to exist within boundaries it cannot cross. But there are creatures in Scripture that are not merely powerful. They are instruments, tools of judgment, released at appointed times to serve a purpose that terrifies precisely because it is intentional. The locusts of Revelation 9 do not come from fields or seasons. They come from the abyss, released by a star that has fallen from heaven, a star given the key to the bottomless pit. When the pit opens, smoke rises like the smoke of a great furnace, darkening the sun and the air. And from the smoke, the locusts emerge. They are not ordinary insects. They have the shape of horses prepared for battle. On their heads are what look like crowns of gold. Their faces are like human faces. They have hair like women's hair, teeth like lions' teeth. They wear breastplates like iron, and the sound of their wings is like the thundering of many chariots rushing into battle. Their tails are like scorpions with stingers, and in their tails is their power to torment for 5 months. They are commanded not to harm the grass or any green thing or any tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. This is precision, this is restraint. These creatures do not rampage, they do not kill, they torment, and only specific people, for a specific duration. They are not chaos, they are judgment, measured, timed, divinely authorized. The horror is not that they exist, the horror is that they are sent. And yet there are beings in Scripture that existed before the rebellion, before the corruption, before the fall. Beings that stand at the threshold of the divine presence itself. Ezekiel saw them by the river Chebar, 4 living creatures, and their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like torches moving back and forth among the creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. Each creature had 4 faces: the face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, the face of an eagle. Each had 4 wings. Under their wings were human hands. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, gleaming like burnished bronze. They moved in any direction without turning. Where the spirit wanted to go, they went. Above them, something like a vault, gleaming like crystal, stretched over their heads. And above the vault was something like a throne, and on the throne was a figure with the appearance of a man, radiant and terrible. These are the cherubim, not the soft infantile figures of Renaissance art, not decorative symbols painted on ceilings. These are beings of overwhelming presence, creatures of fire and form that exist at the edge of human comprehension. They are guardians, attendants, bearers of the glory that no flesh can approach without being undone. To see them is to see the threshold of the holy, the place where creation meets creator, and Ezekiel fell on his face. But not all creatures in Scripture remained as God made them. There were forms that should not have existed. Bodies that were never meant to walk the earth. The Nephilim, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim, giants. Not legends whispered around fires, but historical obstacles that Israel encountered and recorded. The spies sent into Canaan returned trembling. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. This was not exaggeration. This was measurement. The fear was physical, grounded in the staggering difference in scale. Og, king of Bashan, slept in a bed of iron, 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, over 13 feet long. Goliath of Gath stood 6 cubits and a span, over 9 feet tall, and his armor weighed more than most men could carry. These were not symbolic giants. They were biological impossibilities that existed anyway. And their origin is hinted at in Genesis 6, where the sons of God took the daughters of men as wives, and the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The text does not explain everything, but it marks the event as a corruption, a blurring of boundaries that should never have been crossed. The result was a lineage of beings that stood as monuments to transgression, living evidence that something had gone terribly wrong in the order of creation. Their size was not their only abnormality. Their presence destabilized nations. Their strength became the foundation of oppression. They built cities and reigned over territories, and their elimination became part of Israel's divine mandate, not because they were merely foreign, but because they were unnatural. And then there are the dragons. Not creatures of medieval fantasy, but beings that appear throughout Scripture as symbols and sometimes as something more tangible. The Hebrew word tannin is translated variously as serpent, dragon, sea monster, depending on context. In Ezekiel, Pharaoh is called the great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams. In Isaiah, Leviathan is called the fleeing serpent, the twisting serpent, the dragon that is in the sea. In Revelation, the great dragon appears, ancient serpent, devil, Satan, leading a third of the stars of heaven in rebellion, cast down to earth where it continues to make war. The dragon is chaos embodied. It is the force that opposes order, that resists divine will, that coils around nations and individuals alike. It does not negotiate. It devours. Its scales are impenetrable. Its breath is fire. Its presence is a reminder that evil is not merely an idea. It has form. It has teeth. It consumes. Scripture does not shy away from this imagery because the reality it points to is too important to soften. The spiritual forces arrayed against creation are not abstract. They are personal, intentional, and powerful. The dragon represents the fullness of that power, not ultimate, never ultimate, but vast enough to terrify any creature that does not stand under divine protection. Daniel's vision by the Tigris River brought him face to face with 4 beasts rising from the sea. The first was like a lion with the wings of an eagle. As he watched, the wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was given to it. The second beast was like a bear, raised up on one side, with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Arise, devour much flesh." The third was like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and it had 4 heads. Dominion was given to it. The fourth beast was different from all the others, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It had 10 horns. These were not literal animals. They were kingdoms, empires, systems of human power that took on monstrous form in the spiritual realm. Each successive beast was worse than the last, more violent, more complex, more totalizing. The fourth beast in particular had no earthly comparison. It simply was, terrifying, absolute, unstoppable until the Ancient of Days took his seat and the court sat in judgment. The vision reveals something critical. The kingdoms of this world, when viewed from heaven's perspective, are not civilizations. They are beasts. They are predatory, consumptive, hybrid forms that devour populations and trample what remains. And the people living under them, the ones who see only temples and markets and military parades, they do not see the beast. They see the empire. They see the structure. They do not see the spiritual reality feeding beneath the surface. This is where the creatures of Scripture converge into a single revelation. They are not random. They are not mythological padding. They are markers, signs. Each one reveals something about the nature of reality that the visible world conceals. Behemoth and Leviathan reveal divine power over creation's extremes. The cherubim reveal the holiness and terror of God's presence. The beasts of Revelation and Daniel reveal the spiritual architecture of earthly power. The giants reveal corruption of the human form. The locusts reveal measured judgment. The dragon reveals personal cosmic evil. And then there is one final category: creatures that blur the line between human and inhuman. Beings that Scripture describes not as foreign invaders, but as humanity itself, transformed by what it has consumed. Proverbs 30 speaks of a generation whose teeth are swords, whose fangs are knives, to devour the poor from the earth, the needy from among mankind. This is not metaphor softening reality. This is metaphor sharpening it. A generation that has become predatory, that feeds on the weak, that has internalized violence so completely that it has become their nature. Their teeth are no longer human. They are weapons. They are instruments of consumption. This is the final category of creature in Scripture, the one most often overlooked because it is the most uncomfortable. The human who is no longer fully human. The person who has given themselves over to appetites so completely that they have become the appetite. They are not possessed by something external. They have become what they serve. And Scripture describes them with the same precision it uses for Leviathan and the cherubim, because the spiritual transformation is just as real. What Scripture reveals through these creatures is this: the world you see is not the world that is. You live in a cosmos populated by powers and principalities, by beings that operate according to logics you do not perceive. Some of these beings are instruments of divine order. Some are guardians of thresholds. Some are embodiments of chaos, restrained but not eliminated. And some are humanity itself, reshaped by what it worships. The ancient peoples who first read these texts did not have the luxury of skepticism. They lived closer to the edge of the known world. They saw fewer barriers between natural and supernatural. They understood instinctively that creation was larger, stranger, and more dangerous than human perception could fully map. When they read of Leviathan, they did not think of crocodiles. They thought of chaos. When they read of the cherubim, they did not think of decoration. They thought of fire and terror and the unapproachable light. When they read of beasts rising from the sea, they did not think of political cartoons. They thought of empires that devoured nations and the spiritual powers that animated them. Modernity has traded precision for comfort. We prefer symbols we can control, metaphors we can explain, stories we can reduce to moral lessons. But Scripture does not offer that comfort. It offers something far more valuable. It offers truth. And the truth is this: you are not living in a sanitized universe. You are living in a battlefield. The creatures of Scripture mark the boundaries of that battlefield, the places where heaven and earth intersect, where power is exercised, where corruption takes form, where judgment is released. The names have changed. The idols are no longer called Baal or Molech. The empires no longer march under the banners of Babylon or Rome. But the forces they represented, the appetites, the systems, the spiritual powers that press human souls into service, those have not changed. They have adapted. They have learned new languages. They wear new masks, but they are the same beasts rising from the same sea, demanding the same worship, devouring the same populations. We do not see the cherubim because we are not prophets standing by the river Chebar, but the holiness they guard is no less real. We do not see Leviathan because we are not Job standing in the whirlwind, but the chaos it represents is no less present. We do not see the locusts of the abyss because the seal has not yet been broken, but the judgment they foreshadow is no less certain. We do not see the dragon because we have been taught to see only the material, but the war it wages is no less desperate, no less personal, no less costly. The creatures of Scripture were placed in the text to do exactly what they are doing now. They force the question. They disrupt the comfortable categories. They reveal that creation is not tame, that holiness is not soft, that evil is not theoretical, and that judgment is not metaphorical. They show us a world where the spiritual realm is not distant, but adjacent, not symbolic, but actual, not past, but present. And if that world is real, if these creatures mark boundaries that still exist, then the question is not why Scripture describes them. The question is why we stopped seeing them. Why we built a cosmology that excluded the very forces Scripture insists are most important. Why we traded awe for explanation, terror for comfort, preparation for distraction. The creatures are still there. The thresholds are still guarded. The beasts are still rising. The chaos is still contained. The judgment is still measured. And the choice, whether to see or to remain blind, that choice remains. If this exploration stirred something in you, if it unsettled the categories you thought were settled, stay with us. There is more to see, more to understand, more that Scripture reveals when we stop forcing it into the shape we prefer and let it speak in the voice it chose. Subscribe and continue this journey through the strange, the terrible, and the true.